Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, October 16th, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin. We'll be joined momentarily by our committee member, Supervisor Katie Tang. And we are joined today, I think in the beginning of the meeting, certainly for items 1 through 3, by Supervisor Malia Cohen. I want to thank Jim Smith and Leo Diaz from SF Gov TV for covering the meeting today, and Erica Major, the clerk of our committee. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the October 24th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, with that, would you call items 1 through 3 together?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the general plan to revise maps 4 and 5 of the urban design element to refer to the Pier 70 mixed-use project special use district. Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code and the zoning map to add Pier 70 special use district and making appropriate findings. And item number 3 is a resolution approving the compromise title settlement and land exchange agreement for Pier 70.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. So, colleagues, these items all relate to the potential development on Pier 70, which is in Supervisor Cohen's district. So, yes. Supervisor Cohen, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very exciting time for us. I'm pleased and proud that we're here today after a decade of extensive public process and discussion and thoughts and envisioning around what we are going to do about this little piece of property in the Dogpatch neighborhood. And after years of outreach and concept development, the Pier 70 project has evolved into a clear vision to integrate and restore a 28-acre site into the fabric of San Francisco, creating active, sustainable neighborhood that recognizes and acknowledges and pays respects to its industrial past. So for those that have not been out to the project site, the defining feature of the Pier 70 waterfront is that there isn't one. At least there isn't one that's accessible to the public. See, for decades, this area has been fenced off. It's been inaccessible to the public, except for maybe those who have had the misfortune of having their car towed. They seem to know where Pier 70 is located yet. But quite literally, people have lived just blocks from the bay and have had absolutely no way to experience the beautiful, breathtaking views of the waterfront and of the open space in the neighborhood. So this project is bringing access and connection to a piece of the waterfront that has never been accessible. And beyond access, this project also delivers over $750 million of public benefit, which includes public housing with 30% on-site affordability, transportation improvements, which I'm grateful for, and funding as well as workforce development, the historic rehabilitation of some beautiful buildings, open space parks, also ensuring that there's sea level rise protections built into the project, and much more. We will be considering as part of the development agreement comes before the Budget Committee, which is going to be scheduled for this Thursday. As you will hear from the Planning Department later on, the Pier 70 SUD Design for Development, or a D for D for those of you who are planning wonks, Aaron Peskin. The future of the 28-acre site is envisioned as an extension of the nearby Dogpatch neighborhood that brings in the community, the residents, the workers, artists, manufacturers, all that live in this nice little neighborhood. It is a goal, and the goal is also to bring into existence a lively mix of uses and activities. So I have several amendments that I'd like to discuss later on in this committee, but first I'd like to provide the project sponsor and various city departments an opportunity to present to us this fantastic project. Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Colleagues, if no other comments at this point in time, so in terms of speakers, we have a number of folks. First, I'd like to call up from Forest City, the project sponsor. I believe Jack is here. And if anybody wants to retweak the order of speakers, you're welcome to do that. This was the order that we have in front of us.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Jack Sylvan with Forest City. We're really excited to be here today. I'm going to walk through the project plans, and then I believe David Beaupre will speak, and then Sarah Dennis Phillips from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. What you're seeing before you today is the culmination of a long, comprehensive, and unprecedented outreach and planning process. Getting to this point, as Supervisor Cohen mentioned, has been 10 years in the making, from when the port started the master planning process for Pier 70 in 2007 through the selection of Forest City in 2011 to where we are today. Along the way, we've engaged with the neighborhoods and interested stakeholders in every way we know how. That has included activating the site through large and small community events to open the site to folks who were not just there to pick up their towed car for the first time in over 100 years. Some of you were around when in 2013, the Board of Supervisors endorsed a term sheet for the Pier 70 project, which, subject to the adjustment of height and public benefits via the subsequent process, continues to form the underlying development concept and the overall business structure with the port. In 2014, we were the first project to go to the ballot to comply with Proposition B. At that time, 73% of the voters voted to support the project with the robust public benefits package that we'll talk a little bit more about, including the 30% affordable housing, the waterfront parks, new artist studio space. It's a truly mixed-use project evolving to between 1,000 and 2,000 housing units and 1 million and 2 million square feet of commercial office space. And this ballot measure also authorized the adjustment of the height limit from 40 feet to 90 feet, which would take effect upon the approval of the project documents. With a great team of participants from the engaged neighborhood, committed city and port staff, and a fantastic design team, we put in place the foundation to create the great future place that Pier 70 deserves to be once again. Working with the neighborhood and the port, the plan, which originally was 100% office, evolved into a solidly mixed-use plan that at its core is residential, local retail, space for makers and artists, all of this oriented around revitalized historic buildings, connected to the waterfront by a network of active open spaces. On the northern boundary of the site, adjacent to the ship repair facility, commercial office uses are appropriately placed to buffer the industrial activity. On the southern boundary of the site, which is adjacent to the decommissioned power plant and the open-air electrical switchyard, the potential development is zoned to be able to respond to whether or not and when these industrial facilities transition to a use that would be compatible with residential. Between the 28-acre waterfront site, which Forest City will develop, and the 7 acres of the Illinois parcels, which are owned by the port and PG&E, the overall 35-acre special use district contains approximately 2,300 residential units, 1.1 million square feet of commercial office, 650,000 square feet on parcels that could either be residential or office, subject to the same transition of site conditions that I mentioned in the prior slide, and 500,000 square feet of local retail, neighborhood services, arts, and local makerspace. I'll note that I believe the supervisor is going to discuss an amendment that is reflected in this land use program. The neighborhood will be reconnected to the bay for the first time in more than 100 years with the creation of a local post-industrial waterfront park that reflects the character of the historic district, and the revitalized shoreline will be transformed to accommodate sea level rise while also providing a truly unique San Francisco waterfront experience. Bookmarking the parks at the heart of the site are 2 substantial centers of activation and placemaking. a Building 12 Makers Market Hall where small-scale makers will mix in a European public market experience, potentially with a small grocery, and on one of the prime waterfront sites, an arts facility of up to 90,000 square feet that would include the state-of-the-art replacement studio space for the Noonan building community. More than half of the site is designed to be for the enjoyment of pedestrians, including special moments like this narrow walkway between two historic buildings. Honoring the rich history of the site, we worked with the city agencies to create design guidelines that have been acknowledged by the neighborhood and even some of the toughest critics on the Planning Commission for their comprehensiveness and innovative approach. Historic structures will be repurposed in unique ways to maintain the authenticity of the district, and new structures will complement the adjacent structures, allowing future visitors to experience the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries simultaneously. With that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be before you to ask for your recommendation for this project. And David Beaupre from the Port is going to speak about the proposed Tidelands Trust Exchange.
Thank you, Jack. Good afternoon, supervisors. David Beaupre from the Port of San Francisco. Just going to provide a brief history on the ownership and public trust of the Pier 70 site. As you can see in this first slide, there's a very complex history of ownership on Pier 70. That's a mix of both trust land, historically non-trust land that was in private ownership, uplands land, which is illustrated in gray, and then the light green areas are areas that were both in private ownership and in the public trust. In order to facilitate not only this project, but other projects within Pier 70, the Port's worked with the State Lands Commission and the California legislature to develop the approved Assembly Bill 418 that authorized a public trust exchange within the site. This public trust exchange makes certain that the public trust is applied to certain port lands and Pier 70 lands that will continue to be used for trust purposes, such as the ship repair, the waterfront open spaces, and the roadways serving those uses, and then pulls certain lands out of the trust that have a questionable trust status. So this illustration shows the dark green areas that are going to be put into the trust, the light green areas that are in the trust and will stay in the trust. The pink areas are lands coming out of the trust. And then the pink and red hatched areas are unconfirmed lands that will come out of the trust. And the green hatched areas are trust lands that will be confirmed into the trust, with an ultimate configuration that has, again, the waterfront parks, the ship repair yard, and the roads serving those functions within the trust, and everything else coming out of the trust. The one area to note are the green water parcels that are east of the dashed line. Those will be confirmed into the trust, but not as a part of this initial exchange. And with that, I'll turn it to Sarah Dennis Phillips to talk about the project benefits. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thanks very much for having us. Sarah Dennis Phillips with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble making the slides move. Hold on one moment. There we go. Apologies. So we've been before this committee before speaking about our Southern Bayfront strategy, which is really a cross-departmental strategy trying to coordinate all the development that's happening up and down the Southeast. You are all very aware, particularly Supervisor Cohen, whose district is ground zero for much of this change, of all the development that is both underway and being planned, starting from Mission Rock at the north all the way to Candlestick Point and Executive Park to the south. Lots, 20,000 new households, almost 7,000 new affordable units, 38,000 new jobs, lots of open space. And I just referenced this slide again to put in context what we're talking about here in Pier 70. There are a lot of public benefits we're going to discuss here. They're not alone. They're going to be part and parcel of other improvements and benefits coming before you with Mission Rock and subsequent approvals on other projects. Just to give a high-level overview of what the public benefits package here includes, it spans everything from the site's history to brand-new infrastructure, seawall and waterfront resiliency, new parks, affordable housing, bike, ped, and transit improvements, transportation demand management strategies, arts uses, artist preservation, PDR, which is our funny word for industrial, as many of you know, jobs for local residents, local businesses, and small businesses. To give a little detail on each of those, the 8 key areas that we deal with in our Southern Bayfront that are also touched on here: housing affordability, transportation, sustainability, sea level rise, historic resources, community facilities, open space, and workforce development. I can go over these briefly here, and I'm available for questions thereafter. Within housing affordability, 30% of the units created on site within the 28 acres will be permanently affordable. The majority of those will be to low-income residents. All the rental buildings will have 20% on-site affordability. We think those will be done through the tax credit program, so those will be at low-income levels. We're also going to have 3 sites that are dedicated by the port for construction of new affordable housing. That'll total about 327 affordable units on those 3 parcels. Those will also be the majority low income, and they will be funded, their construction will be funded solely from sources on site. Transportation, we've got about $45 million that we've negotiated, which is more than would be required under code. The project is grandfathered under the transportation fee ordinance, but we're having them pay full freight here. It totals between $45 and $50 million, depending on the program that is ultimately built. And we've worked very closely with our partners at MTA to develop a list of transportation projects that the neighborhood feels are needed and that MTA feels really will move the needle in terms of changing traffic and transportation behavior in the neighborhood. And we're looking to see those implemented, some of them in the very near term. There are a number of sustainability features embedded throughout the site, and we can provide detail on those if you have questions. Sea level rise as well. Not only are we accommodating the 100-year flood and the 66 inches that are projected, we have a permanent source of revenue through a Melrose tax, an on-site tax that will provide shoreline funding, totaling up to about $2 billion over the course of the project. The project has been designated a historic district. 3 of the most historic buildings are being preserved and rehabilitated for full reuse. Irish Hill, which is a remnant of an open space from the areas past as a working neighborhood, is being preserved and commemorated both on-site and through open spaces that are directly adjacent to it. Community facilities, the project will include a 90,000 square foot arts and culture building. It will rehouse all of the Noonan artists on site, and as those artists transition out, it will provide permanently affordable space for new artists from the neighborhood. We've got 100 spaces of on-site childcare that are going to be embedded directly in the site through 2 different childcare facilities, 50 spaces each. And the project, through its community facilities district, is contributing $2.5 million towards a much-needed community center for the Dogpatch neighborhood. Where and what that community center is still requires work from our agency and all of our partner agencies, but we are starting to develop the seed funding for what's needed. Open space, 9 acres total. We're most excited about a 1-acre playground, which has been very difficult to get on port land because of state land restrictions. We're able to do that on the Hoedown Yard, which is right now a PG&E site, but will become private property that we can develop through this project. I've already talked about the improvements to Irish Hill that we're, and the opening up of views and access to Irish Hill that we'll do through our open space program, and then the Bay Trail will continue from Crane Cove Park through this site and ultimately through the adjacent Potrero Power Plant site. Workforce development, a number of components here. We have over $1 million contributed directly to our workforce training programs through OEWD and directly to YCD. We've got a 17% LBE requirement on site. First source, we're requiring that for both retail development and for all tech offices, so we can contribute and expand our Tech SF program and get workers not only into entry-level positions on the site, but to moderate skilled levels positions on the site, and have them access that workforce ladder as they grow. And then we also have a small business program that we have worked with the project sponsor on and will require ongoing coordination with OEWD. And with that, I shall turn it over to planning to talk about the Planning Commission's actions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Rich Sucre, Planning Department staff. So on August 24th, 2017, the Planning Commission certified the Pier 70 mixed-use project final environmental impact report, as well as adopted findings under the California Environmental Quality Act, including the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. The Planning Commission also recommended support for the general plan amendments to basically establish and reference the Pier 70 mixed-use district, special use district. The Planning Commission also undertook some zoning map amendments, or recommended approval of zoning map amendments to update the zoning district for the Pier 70 mixed-use district, as well as the height and bulk districts to make sure they conform with the Prop F. Finally, the Planning Commission undertook amendments to the Planning Code to establish the Pier 70 Special Use District, as well, including adoption of the Design for Development document and recommending approval of the development agreement. The city agencies are here to answer any questions, and this concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Cohen, I believe that is the end of the roster of planned speakers for today.
Great. Mr. Chair, do you want to go to public comment and then we do the amendments? Sure. Okay.
Why don't we do that? We'll open this up to public comment on items 1 through 3. Is there anybody that wishes to comment on any of these items? If you do, please step forward. Everyone will have 2 minutes. If you're not first, you can line up against the far wall and we can get people going. Come on up.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Tyra Fennell, and I'm standing here in support of the Pier 70 project and urge your approval. I'm a Bayview resident, and I own a business located in the Dogpatch neighborhood. Therefore, I'm deeply invested and connected with the District 10 community. This project is supported by most of my colleagues and neighbors, and with 73% of voters and neighborhood organizations also supporting this during Prop F, it is one that more than likely should be approved. The comprehensive public benefits provided are things this neighborhood badly needs and that the community members have strongly advocated for. For example, as a middle-income resident, lack of housing access frightens me. Pier 70 will build much-needed housing for everyone, and 30% of those units will be affordable and for affordable and low to moderate income residents like me. I have also had the opportunity to connect with the Pier 70 developers around their transportation plan. Currently, I have to use a myriad of alternative transportation forms to get to and from the southeast sector of the city. This project will support strengthening transportation improvements, which are much needed around the city, with approximately $15 million in transportation funds generated by Pier 70. And lastly, as an arts producer, this project provides affordable space for artists in the city now and long term, something that San Francisco desperately needs. So therefore, for all the aforementioned reasons, I urge you to approve this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Malia Cohen and Board of Supervisors. My name is Vanessa Aquino. I'm here to show my support for Pier 70 and encourage the supervisors to approve this amazing and fantastic and terrific project. As you know, I'm a proud native San Franciscan living in Dogpatch for over 14 years, and this community is my family. As a board member of the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association for the past 8 years, I have seen amazing changes and growth all around Dogpatch. Like Malia said, this is exciting. We are living in exciting times because our city is growing for the best. Here's why I ask for your support. The Pier 70 project. It has been very active in our community about their project for over 6 years. They have hosted numerous outreach workshops. I've gotten to know them all very well. They're awesome people. Extensive coordination with DNA and other neighborhood organizations to engage and be involved with the community. What's exciting as well is 30% affordable housing, which we need desperately. Low and moderate income residents can benefit. Having affordable housing is so important to keep those of us who have lived here all of our lives in the city. We love it here. We want to stay because we deserve it. Lastly, Pier 70 project will create full-time jobs. They are focused on incorporating a requirement to hire 30% of all construction workers locally, aiming to hire my neighbors in Dogpatch, Bayview, and Potrero Hill. Please support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith speaking on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition in support of the project here today. We'll let a lot of the residents in the neighborhood kind of talk about the specific aspects. There is one thing that we do want to bring up, and we've been bringing this up with a number of other projects in the area, most recently Mission Rock. The conversation at the planning commission regarding this project and the timeline of everything getting worked out in the phases, it's going to be complicated, and we know that. We've got a fantastic housing package that is already done. We know we're going to be getting 30% subsidized affordable on-site with all those units. But for potential future housing, so if there is a situation where the project sponsor and the city have the opportunity to pick commercial or residential, most of the time, unfortunately, we are always going commercial because of the financial incentives that have been put in place. So what we would ask is for everybody to explore the option of, again, for additional housing on top of what we have, to explore the economic feasibility of adding more housing that is not necessarily at 30% BMR on site. So trying to figure out that economic equivalence between what commercial space would create and what 10 or 15 or 20% subsidized affordable housing would do from a financial perspective. We are more focused on the total number of subsidized affordable units and total units, not just the percentage. But absolutely, please pass this forward today. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, Michael Terrio, San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. We've watched this project and Four Cities outreach on it for some years now and have been impressed by the extent of that outreach and the imagination behind it. I think you've seen the results of that both in the a very substantial public vote on behalf of the project and in the recent approvals at the Planning Commission and the Port. We ask that you, in your turn, forward to the full Board of Supervisors the approvals before you, the State Lands Exchange, the General Fund Amendment, the General Plan Amendment, excuse me, the Planning Code Amendment, the CEQA approvals, et cetera, with a recommendation for approval. We remain very supportive of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors. My name is Mary Heisinger.
Ma'am, if you could pull that closer. There you go.
Thank you. My name is Mary Heisinger. I'm a resident of Glen Park, but I'm a member of the Graphics Art Workshop, an artist corporation that's been in the American Industrial Center since the early 90s. And since the boom of the last few years, parking has been really awful. Now, the article in the San Francisco Chronicle on 9/20 mentioned that the developer, which is Forest City, proposes 0.6 parking slots for each housing unit. I thought that this requirement in San Francisco, if you built condos or apartments, was 1 per housing unit, and 1 space for 1,500 square feet of commercial space, which suggests to me that only the guy who runs or manages that space, whether it be office or merchant-oriented, would be the only person able to park. Does this sound reasonable to you? I think not. I'm in general, I'm in favor of what you're saying, although if it were me, I'd rather have 70% for affordable housing and 30% for the really high-priced mega mansions. But I noticed that the presenters in Forest City did not mention the parking situation. So if they would like to speak to that, I'd be very happy to hear what if there's been any changes. since the publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Greetings, supervisors. I'm David Glober. I've lived on Potrero Hill for 22 years, and I spent a lot of time in Dogpatch. Frequently walk along the waterfront. And I've been a member of the Potrero Boosters Executive Committee, and I've frequently participated in meetings of the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association, and I helped start the Green Benefit District as a member of the Formation Committee. I am here in support of the project. Forest City has been exceptional in the ways that they've interacted with the community, as I'm sure you're aware and I'm sure you've heard. When they do make presentations at community meetings, they seem to genuinely seek and listen to comments and input, which has influenced the overall program. Forest City has designed a program for Pier 70 which balances the built environment with open space, and which includes retail flex space, accommodations for artists, community events, and affordable housing above required minimums. And I'm also really appreciative of their support for the community center, however that's going to turn out in Dogpatch. Pier 70 will also build a naturally contoured slope, as Supervisor Cohen mentioned, which will respond to sea level rise without having to build an unsightly seawall. They have committed to funding transportation improvements, including dealing with the balance of parking and other means of transportation, which the previous speaker addressed. And they will be addressing impacts that they will create, as well as existing, hello, Mr. Mayor, as well as new impacts that, anyway, current problems and coming up problems. I think perhaps even most of all, there appears to be a very collaborative relationship with the port, which I've noticed at meetings of the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association and the Planning Commission. Again, I urge support. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is J.R. Epler, and I'm president of the Potrero Boosters Neighborhood Association. Very excited to be into what's been a very exemplary process for planning. I'm going to jump the gun just a little bit and speak in favor of some of the amendments that Supervisor Cohen is going to propose. As you know, as wonderful as this project is, we had a concern in our neighborhood on its transit and transportation impacts. And based on that, we filed an appeal of the EIR because we had not felt that there were sufficient mitigations. Now, that appeal focused on two things in particular. One is ensuring that those dollars, transportation dollars, that are dedicated from the project actually translate into meaningful neighborhood transit improvement. And the second, which is going to be before you today, is trying to mitigate that incredibly impactful office use by balancing the flexibility needed for the project with a move towards a more residential project. And with negotiations with the city, with Forest City, and with tremendous support from Supervisor Cohen and her staff, in particular Yo-Yo Chan and Sophia Kittler, we've been able to get to an amendment that we think reflects that emphasis on housing, that will provide the flexibility for the project to be able to deal with the future conditions on the site and really get around those issues that we identified in our appeal. So this is a great project. We've been very supportive of the project throughout its timeline. We were unanimously in support of Proposition F, and we're glad that we've been able to get past these remaining hurdles to make sure that this is a successful project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Sunitha Venigala, Director of Real Estate at Community Arts Stabilization Trust, known as CAST, and I'm here today to speak in support of the Pier 70 project. CAST is a nonprofit in the business of cultural placekeeping through acquiring, holding, and managing below market rate space to keep arts and culture here in San Francisco. Arts and culture play a central role to our city's unique identity, history, and economy, yet artists are being displaced from the city due to ever-increasing demand and prices for real estate. To mitigate this issue, CAST brings together public and private sector organizations, philanthropic support, and other resources to secure long-term permanent space in urban centers. With support from the City of San Francisco and a cohort of visionary funders, community, and business leaders, CAST has completed our first two projects with Luggage Store Gallery and Counterpulse in the Central Market and Tenderloin. Our long-term plan is to develop more, including several thousand square feet in the historic dumpster building at 5M. We've had conversations for the past several months with Forest City and the Port of San Francisco about the potential for us to develop and lease up to 90,000 square feet of art space at Pier 70, which we believe will be a singular opportunity to build something truly iconic along the waterfront. We're excited and hopeful about the potential to join a longstanding arts community in the Dogpatch, including artists at the Noonan Building and neighbors like the Minnesota Street Project and Baycat. As you may know, the Noonan Building space will be a replacement on site at Pier 70, and the plan is to house this space within the future arts facility. With additional arts users, we think this mix of small-scale arts and performance spaces will make for a world-class center, a jewel for the Central Waterfront neighborhood and the city of San Francisco. We are happy to be here today to share our vision and excitement and lend the Pier 70 project our enthusiastic support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to recognize our Mayor, Art Agnos, here. Welcome to the board chambers, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see you have a very young secretary today. Is she familiar with the historic rule about mayors getting an extra minute for every year they served in office?
I think we might be able to accommodate that, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm very happy to be here to support this project. I want to thank Supervisor Cohen for her attentiveness to it, and also thank Supervisor Peskin for his support before he was elected when we worked together on Proposition F. I am not paid to be here. I'm a volunteer from Potrero Hill, and obviously have a very strong interest in what has happened along our eastern waterfront, especially the southern waterfront. And I think that this is one of the two very best projects in the history of this city, the Giants Mission Rock project being the other. And what is special about this project, along with that one, is that it comes from the neighborhoods. It comes from the people of San Francisco who negotiated this deal, so that it gives us a criteria and a model for what San Francisco needs if we're really going to build our way out of the affordable housing crisis that we're facing. You've heard all the highlights about 30% affordable housing. You've heard how a third of it's going to be open space that is going to be built by the developer, maintained by the developer, and then given to the city for all of our people's use. It deals with sea level rise. But what's important for this, because it was negotiated with the neighborhoods of our city, Forest City in good faith, talked with all of them, all over 10 years, and especially the last couple of years. And what's important about that is it was reflected in the vote that passed this project. Every single neighborhood voted yes on Prop F. Every single precinct voted yes. And the highest vote totals for this project came from those neighborhoods immediately adjacent to the project area. So what we know is that the people of San Francisco support this, and we bring it to you and our normal planning process, as promised in Prop B, to fine-tune it in a way that you've heard from some of the suggestions that are being made by my fellow speakers. And so when you struggle, as I know this board has tried so hard to come up with criteria that we ought to be using to build affordable housing, you don't have to go much further than looking at this project, because it has everything from affordability to open space to sea level rise to the preservation of artists and all of the other things that make this one of the two best projects in the history of this city. And with that in mind, I respectfully ask you to support it.
Thank you, Mayor Agnos. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on items 1 through 3? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Cohen?
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time out to come once again to express your support for the project. And I want to also thank those that have the courage to stand up and say, time out, I've got some concerns about the project that we'd like to talk about. So it's sometimes not easy to do. So I want to commend JR for being able to do that. Colleagues, what I have done is I have circulated a series of amendments which are before you today. Most of them are typographical edits and non-substantive changes. Do you see them in front of you? All right, thank you. The other amendment, which you'll find on page 8 and reflected in the land use table on page 6, is a set cap of 1.7 million square feet for office commercial development in the project. This amendment was drafted based on the comments at the Planning Commission hearing about the future of jobs and housing balance, as well as many conversations and discussions with the surrounding neighborhood, as well as discussions with the project sponsor. So I understand that because of a publicly scheduled CEQA appeal on this item, this committee cannot take action on the amendments today. If you need any more clarification, we can direct to Deputy City Attorney John Givner. But what I would like to do is to ask for your support on these amendments as these items come to the full board. So I will be requesting support on the amendments at a later date. Right now, they're just going to sit. One more thing, I want to also recognize my outstanding staff, Yo-Yo Chan and Sophia Kittler, that were very instrumental in helping us negotiate the final details around this project. So thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and I want to associate myself with the words of Supervisor Cohen and many of the speakers and congratulate the Port, the Planning Department, and the project sponsor and all of the parties that have brought this very complicated project on the southern waterfront to the eve of its final passage, and all of the things that we've discussed: sea level rise protection, affordability, open space, urban design, are really to be commended. And as Mayor Agnos indicated, I was an early adopter and stood for Prop F in November of 2014, and was delighted that the voters saw throughout the city and county the benefits of this project that is really a centerpiece to revitalizing the southern waterfront. I also want to commend the Port, which over time has realized that it's not just the northern waterfront where the action's at, but the southern waterfront, and that change in policy that even precedes our new director, Ms. Forbes, is really to be lauded. And the southern waterfront has too long been ignored, and the kind of work that's happening at Crane Cove, at Pier 70, with the historic buildings under Mr. Orton, and here in the case of the Forest City project is really, I think, a turning point for the city and the southern waterfront. I am totally supportive of the amendments that Supervisor Cohen has brought forward, and I think that the intervening week gives us a chance to talk about some of the details in here. One thing that I have learned from being around long enough is that these multi-year, multi-phase projects, long after the individuals who struck the deals are gone, take on a life of their own, and it's with that lens that this weekend I was reading the items, particularly item number 2, the changes to the planning code, and in addition to needling our attorney and the, I'm sure, well-paid attorneys for the project sponsor, wherein I note the date of the election was not 2015 but 2014. Maybe there are other things that need fixing. And as I discussed with Supervisor Cohen and the mayor's staff this morning, I think there are a number of things, I'm going to talk about them at a high level, that we should be very cognizant of in the planning code changes. And I certainly, and maybe actually for the edification of the committee, we might want to ask planning staff to tell this panel as well as the public what exactly D4D is, design for development. I think that is very important. But as I was reading through this, there are a number of things that I think we should think about in the intervening week, and I just want to speak to a few of them. The time frames for approvals of things that are in future phases that have yet to be designed are very compressed, and I think I understand why that is. We obviously don't want delays to stymie the implementation of the project. But I think we should look at this with our eyes wide open. Public noticing of 10 days seems a little short. There are plenty of places here where we are delegating powers to the port director, the port commission, that are not subject to any public hearing, public review, public notice. I think we should be very careful about that, Mayor Agnos, when in 10 years, when Mr. Ratner is, moved on to other projects in another part of the country, and Mr. Sylvan has retired or joined Ms. Arena at another company, and all of us are gone, and your neighbors are upset about something. I think we want to really look at those with our eyes wide open. The way major modifications can happen, i.e. complete changes from what we are all very excited about, where they have to be scheduled at the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting, which could be a week away. I think we should rethink those kind of things so that we all have adequate notice a year out and 5 years out and 10 years out, because a project of this magnitude is going to take many, many years, if not decades, to build. So it's language, for instance, on page 18 at line 22, having to do with whether the important planning staff deem a application to be complete. It's language around major modifications that, as I said earlier, would go to the next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting. And it's language around the powers that we're delegating. I mean, for instance, the temporary use provisions on page 8, I think those are fine to give the executive director of the port the ability to do temporary uses without a public hearing. But interim uses that can be 5 years in duration, I think those might be worthy of a public hearing. That's the conversation I would like to have in the intervening week. It is in no way meant to slow things down or to take away from an absolutely meritorious project that has, I think, been a perfect example of what a real public-private partnership working with the community can be. And so I tip my hat to you, but I would like to try to fine-tune these details in the intervening week so that we don't wake up in 10 or 20 years going, we should have done that a little differently. So with that, I will endeavor to work with staff and Supervisor Cohen and her staff in the intervening week, and maybe we can fine-tune a few of those things. And in addition to that, as I said, there was actually a Prop F on the November 2015 ballot, although it had nothing to do with the Union Iron Works Historic District, and the election was not on November 4th, so I think we need to fix that on page 5. And I reserve my right to find other fun typos like that.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I just want to congratulate every single person who worked so hard on this particular project. I know it's a momentous occasion that we're here at Land Use and then at Budget and hopefully the full board soon. One of the things I just wanted to ask, I guess, staff or the project sponsor team to just shed more light on, and you had the opportunity to answer this question for me in a private briefing, but just for the public's sake, I think it would be good for them to know, especially given that Supervisor Cohen has just introduced an amendment regarding a cap on office space. I was wondering if you could just clarify, I believe there are about 7 parcels that could be flexed to either become residential or commercial space. And that decision would not appear before the Board of Supervisors, but it would be a decision made by the Port Commission. And so I was just wondering if you could shed light on how that process would work in terms of determining whether it would be commercial or residential space that would ultimately move forward.
Good afternoon, Brad Benson from Port staff representing Director Forbes. There are a number of parcels, particularly along the southern boundary of the site, adjacent to the former Potrero Power Plant site, that are flex use parcels, and they could They could either be developed as commercial office or as residential. That decision will be made at the phase application. As Supervisor Peskin was mentioning, there are 3 phases in the project. The developer will come in with its phase proposal, which will be approved by either the Port Director or the Port Commission, depending on its consistency with the phasing plan that's before you. And the factors that will determine whether to go commercial or residential will be market conditions. Sometimes it's a good housing market, sometimes it's a good office market. Environmental conditions, there's some cleanup underway that PG&E is undertaking this fall and this winter that could impact that decision, and then adjacent land uses on the Potrero power plant site. So that's how that process around flex use would unfold.
And then do you, can you explain, I know you can't pinpoint exactly when those decisions would be made, but I know you explained to me there are kind of 3 phases to the project, and so maybe kind of breaking that down so we have a general idea of when you might know at which juncture of the project that you would go commercial or residential.
Let me just go grab the phasing plan so that I can show it up on the screen. Okay, so this map shows the phasing plan. There are 3 phases in the project. Yellow is phase 1, including streets, parks, and development pads. Orange is phase 3, actually, and blue is phase 2. So initially, the developer will come in with the first phase application. They'll have an approval process through the port. The developer will have, I believe it's 7 years to build phase 1. And then the schedule of performance that's attached to the DDA that will be up in the budget committee this Thursday gives 8 years for phase, 8.5 years for phase 2 and 8.5 years for phase 3. We actually believe that those timelines are going to be compressed in the project. We think that this is an infill project and it will build out more quickly. So now let me show you the flex parcels that I was talking about earlier are shown in crosshatch. Along the boundary with the former Potrero power plant site. Those could go either office or residential. And then you'll see some flex parcels sort of in the interior of the project. Some of those are on the hoedown yard, which is PG&E owned land, where the city has an option. And the city will be in a role of helping to decide the uses on that parcel. And then there are a few flex parcels in the interior of the project near the Orton site that will get decided in the same way at the phase level.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, colleagues, any Supervisor Peskin? Are you back on the mic?
I am, thank you, Mr.
All
Chairman. So I was hoping that we could hear from somebody from planning who could tell everybody exactly what design for development is. It's not the first D for D project that's come before this board. And while you're coming up, there's just a few other things that I'd like to focus on in the intervening week. My understanding, and as Mayor Agnos and Ms. Dennis Phillips and others stated, this is a 30% affordable housing project, but if you look at the inclusionary housing requirements on page 16, and this is section 13 of the agreement, all of those numbers there are below 30%, so I want to understand how it can be 30%, but here it reads that rental housing will be 20 or 23% at 80% of area median income, and that owned units will be 28%. So I'm not understanding how that gets to 30%. I'm sure that there's something that I don't know, but in its plain language, I'm not seeing that. Also, with regard to the port review of the historic buildings, which I think we're delighted are being incorporated into the project, I note that there's only port oversight and no planning or historic preservation commission oversight. Wanted to talk about that in the intervening week. And then finally, on a related but different topic, there are two other instruments, the interagency cooperative agreement and the DDA, the development agreement, that are going to the Budget and Finance Committee this Thursday. And I note that as of right now, and I appreciate the fact that we're trying to move this through the process expeditiously, there's still no budget and legislative analyst report. So yesterday when I was doing what we're hired to do and trying to figure it all out, there's still no budget and legislative analyst report as we sit here. So just wanted to say that. I would rather get it done right and take a teeny bit of extra time. It's waited 5 years. It can wait another week, but I would like to get it done right. And I am absolutely committed to making sure that it gets a unanimous vote at the full board. But maybe we can hear about D for D.
Supervisors, Rich Sucre, Planning Department staff. So just to address some of your questions, Supervisor Peskin, the Design for Development document is essentially our land use controls that are specific to the project itself. So it basically establishes a new set of regulations similar to the planning code for evaluating a potential project that comes before us. So when a phase application is submitted and accepted by the port and the planning department, department staff would use this document to basically analyze any future project that comes forward to us. So what is a little different in these types of documents is this one sets out design criteria, it sets out standards for relationships to historic buildings and other features that is not typically found in the planning code or in other kind of design documents.
Thank you.
Supervisors, I'd also like to address Supervisor Peskin's question about the affordable housing, just for the public record, and we can speak more about it next week if you like. One of the complicated things about this project is it is a development agreement project, also subject to a disposition and development agreement with the port. This committee is only seeing the planning code amendments, and so many of the obligations around affordable housing are contained in the DA and the DDA, which will be before the Budget and Finance Committee on Thursday. So to speak a little about how those requirements are bifurcated and how together they come to the 30%. There really are a couple. So the planning code amendments before you today do contain inclusionary affordable housing requirements. The planning code amendments are meant to tell individual buildings coming forward in the special use district, some of which may be within Forest City's 28 acres, but some of which may be in the portion of the project that is just subject to the SUD, the Illinois street parcels and the hoedown yard that Mr. Slovan explained about are not subject to the DA and the DDA. So those have separate affordable housing obligations, and that's why we have those explicitly listed, the 20% on-site requirement for rental buildings that Supervisor Peskin noted, and the 28% in lieu fee obligation for condominium parcels. So that's why it's in the planning code. But the meat of the affordable housing obligations for the 28 acres are in the development agreement and the DDA, and they're laid out as such that contrary to what we are able to do in the planning code, we cannot require someone to do on-site in the planning code. In our DDA, we can. And so we can require all the rental buildings to do 20% on-site. No fee out ability, they just have to do on-site. We also, through the DDA, are obligating the port to dedicate to MoCD and likely directly to their nonprofit partner 3 different parcels, which I'll show you in a minute, which are specified through the affordable housing plan that'll support at a minimum 327 affordable units and possibly more. We've generously sized them to make sure that they fit very large family-sized units, and if a different program happens or we become even more efficient, we'll be able to fit more on those sites. Within those 327 units, we've got 3 funding sources to pay for them. We've got jobs housing linkage fees from the office. We've got in lieu fees from the few condo parcels that are within the 28 acres. And we have tax increment from the hoedown yard, which is the parcel that we will be acquiring from PG&E. So if you look at this map, that shows you the 3 affordable housing parcels. They have been explicitly selected to be as close to transit as possible and as close to the children's playground, so that we can support as much family-sized affordable housing as possible. Those are the 3 yellow parcels shown up here on the screen. While we have a flexible land use program, we do know generally, and the Affordable Housing Plan fixes certain residential parcels as rental. So you can see some annotations of 20%. Those are all designated to be rental buildings to the extent that they go residential. And there's a couple of buildings along the southern border that you see a little hatch next to. We hope and expect that those will go residential. And if they do, those will also be 20% on site. So this shows you how the affordable housing will be located throughout the project. And then just to the math that we're speaking of, we believe that at a midpoint program we'll have about 1,700 units, residential units on site. With the amount of rental buildings that I showed you on the previous map, we should get at 20%, about 178, possibly more, on-site inclusionary units through the mixed income buildings. As I've mentioned a couple of times, we have the 327 minimum permanently affordable units built in projects by MoCD or funded through MoCD, and together that comes to the 30% that we've been referencing. And I'm available for questions if you want to dig into that further.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, any further questions or comments at this time? Supervisor Cohen?
No, thank you.
Okay. So the request right now is to continue these items?
Yes, we'd like to, my request to the committee is to continue the items for 1 week.
Okay.
Thank you.
So colleagues, motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, and we can take that without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. Thank you, everyone who came to present on those items and comment. Madam Clerk, with that, would you call item number 4, please?
Yes, item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to create the Transit Center Special Sign District to restrict the size and height of new signs within 200 feet of and visible from an existing or planned public park or open space, to restrict illumination of certain new signs in those areas, amending the zoning map to show the Transit Center Special Sign District, and affirming and making appropriate findings.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So, colleagues, we've received a request to continue this item. So I will open up to public comment, but then ask if we could continue to the call of the chair. With that, could we open this up, item number 4, to public comment? Anybody wish to comment on item number 4? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Motion to continue to call of the chair.
Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Tang. We could take that without objection. Okay, I see Mr. Kozycki here. So with that, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 5, please?
Item number 5 is a hearing on San Francisco's 5-year strategic framework plan to reduce homelessness.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to welcome Jeff Kozycki here to our board chambers, who is the director of our Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. So, colleagues, I called for this hearing today to go over the new 5-year plan that our department has just released. Homelessness continues to remain a crisis in our city. It's one of the top concerns that I hear from residents, certainly in my district and throughout the city of San Francisco, and should be a continuing top priority for all of us in City Hall, and I know something we talk about quite often. The last long-term plan written to reduce chronic homelessness, called the 10-year plan, sunset in 2014. And despite the city meeting the main goals of this 10-year plan by creating over 3,000 new units of supportive housing and adopting our Housing First strategy, homelessness in San Francisco continues to persist. Over 25,000 homeless people have left the streets or shelter system for permanent housing since the 10-year plan was implemented. While that's a success, we obviously have a ton of more work to do. So the board, in conjunction with the newly created Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, approved legislation directing the department to draft and implement a new 5-year strategic plan to reduce homelessness. The department just released this 5-year plan over the past week, and I know Director Kozycki and his team have focused on 4 key areas to help those most in need on our streets. That I will let him go over in the presentation. I wanted to host this hearing to give our director a chance to inform the board about the new plan, what his department is doing to address the crisis, and I just want to thank him for all of his hard work. I see Commander Lazar here as well. Thank you for everyone's continued effort here. This is a family effort. It takes a village, if you will, in the city of San Francisco. So with that, Mr. Krasicka, I'd like to offer you the podium and a chance to talk through your plans.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, supervisors. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to present the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing's 5-year strategic framework. I'm going to go over this very briefly to leave time for questions and public discussion. Want to point out that this is not a this is a roadmap. It's not a financial plan. It's not a incredibly detailed strategic plan, but it is a really well thought out framework for how we can substantially reduce homelessness in the city during the next 5 years. It took about a year to develop this. We received input from a wide variety of stakeholders, most notably over 1,000 surveys and focus groups done with people who are experiencing homelessness. Again, the overall goal, I should also point out that the PowerPoint presentation, the handouts that we gave you are slightly longer than what we're going to present today. The overall goal, as I had mentioned previously, is sustained and substantial reduction in homelessness in the city. And we're going to do that by focusing on 5 different areas. Systems change, really moving from the current system to a coordinated entry system, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then breaking the homeless population out into subgroups to really focus on the special needs of each of these populations with very specific and measurable goals, one being reducing chronic homelessness by 50% by 2022. And chronic homelessness are individuals experiencing homelessness for a year or longer and with a disability. Under the family section, you'll see 2 goals, ensuring that no families with children are unsheltered by December of 2018. We don't have a large number of unsheltered families in the city, but that number should be 0, and it will be by the end of 2018. And then effectively ending family homelessness by December of 2021. And I don't want to imply that that means there will never be another homeless family in the city. What ending family homelessness means is preventing it whenever you can, and when it does occur, addressing it immediately. And our goal is to address family homelessness within 90 days of a family losing their housing and getting them assistance and rehoused quickly. On youth homelessness, we'll be providing more details. We've received a grant from HUD. We are one of 10 cities around the U.S. to receive such a grant, and it requires that we're going through a separate planning process with HUD, with their approval, involving youth and other providers in the process. So we will have a more specific goal around reducing youth homelessness. And then lastly, the issue of street homelessness. This problem has become increasingly visible on our streets. I think it's important to note that the number of homeless people hasn't increased dramatically in San Francisco, but as the city continues to grow and more land gets developed, the problem is becoming more and more visible and is impacting more and more neighborhoods. And we'll be working very hard to improve how the city responds to street homelessness, as well as having the goal of no large long-term tent encampments. Many of you already know this information, but just to summarize, the city spends approximately, or our department's budget is $239 million for fiscal year 17-18. One important thing to note here, and this is where folks often get confused around the numbers, is that 66%, almost 2/3 of that money goes to house people, providing housing for over 9,000 individuals living in our permanent supportive housing sites. I think another important figure to note is that oftentimes people will take these numbers and divide it by 7,500, which is the point-in-time count number that was done. That's our annual or biannual census that we do with the homeless population. It's important to note that that point-in-time count is just how many homeless people are there in one evening. We estimate that approximately 21,000 individuals come through San Francisco on any given year experiencing homelessness. We know at least 15,000 people, unique individuals every year, are accessing services.
So, Director Kazisi, just to put a point on that, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think this is a really important point because I get emails all the time of residents calculating how much we spend per homeless person here in the city of San Francisco and take that 200, is it 69 million? 39 million divided by 7,000 and they get a whopping number. And just to be clear, what you're saying is, so that's really about 80 million divided by 20,000 or 21,000 should be the appropriate, if people are doing real numbers here, that is the appropriate way to think about this.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
But we do spend substantially on this issue, regardless of how you do the math. And as a result, we have quite an inventory of services available for people experiencing homelessness. As you'll see on this slide, we have approximately 1,500 eviction prevention slots, 800 homeward bound slots, which helps people reconnect with family and friends in other communities. We have about 200 chairs and resource centers, and of course the HOT team and the encampment resolution team, and a variety of other specialized outreach teams that are led by the nonprofit sector. We have 2,367 temporary shelter beds, and that includes shelters, navigation centers, stabilization beds, as well as conventional shelters. It's important to note here, though, San Francisco has about 25 shelter beds for every 100 homeless people, whereas New York has about 95 for every 100 homeless individuals, which is why the problem is so much more, one of the reasons why it's so much more visible on the West Coast and in San Francisco. We have 7,400 units of permanent supportive housing. That's more per capita than any other city in the United States. We should be very proud of that investment. And we also have 961 short and long-term rental subsidies that are available. And lastly, we have this new Housing Ladder initiative. We currently have 50 Moving On initiative subsidies that we were using this past fiscal year to help people move out of permanent supportive housing to create more turnover, essentially adding more beds without adding more beds. It's important to note of that 7,403 units of housing, only about 800 of those units turn over on any given year. Which is why the Moving On initiative will help us expand the number of people that are moving out. So with all this investment that we have made over the years, I think that we wonder why we haven't made more progress. And one of the reasons is that San Francisco has amazing model programs that are known around the world, certainly around the U.S. Project Homeless Connect has been replicated in 200 other communities. Housing First, or what was called direct access to housing, was really pioneered here in San Francisco. So when people ask, why don't we do Housing First like Salt Lake, we should be reminding them that was invented here in San Francisco. And New York and LA want to lay claim to that as well, but we were certainly one of the early adopters of that. Navigation centers, Jazzy's Place, first LGBTQ shelter in the country. Many of these amazing programs run by our nonprofit partners were pioneered here in San Francisco. And while we have these amazing model programs, we did not have a model system. And this graphic is essentially describing how the current system, or how the system used to work as we're moving away from this. Each one of these arrows represents a trip that a homeless person might need to take in order to access services. When they get to the end of that line, they're going to be assessed by a social worker, asked the same questions that they were asked by the other two social workers that they maybe had seen in previous months because that data wasn't being shared across nonprofits or throughout the city. Essentially re-traumatizing people and wasting their time by asking the same questions over and over again about their experience with homelessness. And then they're going to be put on a waiting list for housing, waiting list for shelter, and not given very much information at all about what's going to happen to them next, what they're actually eligible for, and what to expect. And as you expect when you tell somebody to get on a waiting list, they tend to wait rather than to take action around addressing their homelessness. So really an unfair way. It wasn't intentional, but it's a very unfair way to treat individuals who are already in crisis. It also is an inefficient way to manage our resources. Under this system, it's very difficult to prioritize who gets access to permanent supportive housing. Whereas somebody might just need a short-term rent subsidy. If they get into the right line, they're going to end up with permanent supportive housing, which is housing that's subsidized. They pay a portion of their income to rent and receive on-site services, whereas another intervention may have been more expedient and effective for them. And people who are chronically homeless, maybe suffering on our streets, unable to navigate this system, end up not getting access to that type of housing. So I think the major component of what the department's strategic framework is about is this creation of a homelessness response system anchored in something called coordinated entry. This is a recommended way of doing business by HUD. We are, I'd say, a little bit behind the curve relative to other large cities in the United States around coordinated entry. Essentially, it works as you'll see on this graphic here. No matter where you come from, you will get entered into our data system, which is called the One System. City currently has 15 different databases that we're merging into one data system. That system is live as of June and will be fully implemented by the end of 2018. Once you get entered into this system, either at a resource center or at one of our access points or by outreach worker out in the streets, you will receive a single assessment. That assessment will be the same and only assessment that you will be required to participate in, and it will be shared across all of our providers. That assessment, everybody, when they get assessed, we're going to engage in what's called problem solving. In other communities, they tend to refer to this as prevention and diversion, and it's something we don't do enough in San Francisco. Essentially, the idea here is that we're going to ask everybody how we can get a key into their hand as quickly as possible without giving them permanent supportive housing, whether it's making sure every single person gets offered the Homeward Bound program, or providing people with short-term rent subsidies for 3 months or 6 months in order to help them get back on their feet again. Maybe somebody just needs their car getting fixed. Whatever we can do, because clearly we don't have enough housing for everybody, and we need to find new ways of getting folks housed and diverting them from the system or preventing them from becoming homeless. We do some of this now, but we're going to do it in a more methodical way and make sure that every single person is offered the opportunity. We're also not naive to think that a large number of people are suddenly going to take advantage of this and just leave the city or try to find housing in this really difficult market. But we believe even if 10% of the people who we see every year take advantage of this, that's going to lead to a substantial reduction in homelessness and burdens on the system. The other thing coordinated entry does is it helps us prioritize who gets what service. We're going to start making sure that people who are the longest term homeless with the highest acuity and disability will be prioritized for permanent supportive housing, and then they will be referred to that housing. Or to the appropriate intervention. It might be rapid rehousing, which is it could be anywhere from a 6-month to 2-year rent subsidy program, or to permanent supportive housing. Really what we're trying to do is create flow in the system where we try to keep people from entering, and we try to speed up the way in which people get access to services. The other element to this is really a focus on data and using data to make decisions about where we invest our resources and how we do our work. We've created a fairly complex data model. This slide is an example of how that data model would be used, where we simply have taken the number of this is showing us how we're going to reduce chronic homelessness by 50%. And we modeled for what we expect the inflow into the system to be, people who are newly chronically homeless, plus people who maybe are living in our permanent supportive housing and get evicted or enter into the system and become chronic again, minus housing placements and minus prevention. In other words, reducing inflow. So you'll see the green bar there is the negative bar, really. It's people who are homeless on the streets, and the gray are the number of people that we're able to place or prevent from becoming homeless. There's a lot of data behind this, but it is really the way we need to move forward as a city, is not sort of making decisions based on let's build X number of units of housing in a plan without thinking about inflow and exits and being a little bit more sophisticated about how we use information and how we make investments. Through this process, one of the most striking things that I saw is that we're housing about 2,000 people a year. in our housing programs, we're helping about 2,000 people a year exit homelessness through Homeward Bound, through rapid rehousing, through placements in permanent supportive housing. But when we did the point-in-time count, we saw that 3,000 people were newly homeless that year. So clearly, we're never going to bend the curve if we are housing 2,000 people a year or placing 2,000 people a year, but 3,000 people a year are coming in experiencing homelessness. So we really need to up the focus on prevention and diversion. We certainly need to build more housing as well, but that needs to be combined with trying to find ways to reduce the inflow, and having a good data system and thinking about this in a more systematic approach is really going to help the city use the resources that we invest in a better way. So some folks have asked me, you've been in your job for over a year, department's been open for over a year, and you just are putting out a plan now. Is that all you've been doing? And I just wanted to remind folks, work is already underway on this. We also need to maintain the work that was being done by our partners at HSA and DPH, who did amazing jobs helping folks, and we've picked up the ball and are running those programs. During our first 12 months, we helped about 9,000 people who are living in our permanent supportive housing. These aren't placements. These are folks who are already there. We help them maintain their housing. We have an eviction rate of less than 2%, which is admirable, and thanks to the great work done by our nonprofit partners. We helped over 1,900 people last year exit homelessness, either through Homeward Bound or rapid rehousing or permanent housing, provided temporary shelter to 7,000 unique individuals on the street, provided about 7,000 unique individuals, provided about 6,000 people with outreach and case management, and then also provided about 450 people in 18 large encampment with shelter and services. We also have started much of the work that's in our strategic framework is already well underway. We have opened up 4 navigation centers. We're adding 150 temporary shelter beds in 2018. We added 300 units of permanent supportive housing during the last year, and I'm sorry, there's an error here. We're adding 1,300 more PSH units during the next 5 years, which is a substantial increase in the portfolio. We started the encampment resolution team last year, and we've expanded the ERT and SF HOT in 2018 through state funding that we've received through the whole person care waiver. We're working on overhauling our resource center system, and we're adding capacity to that in 2018. We also launched the Moving On initiative during our first year, and now we have an additional 300 subsidies for the Moving On initiative for a total of about 350 placements. 600 new units of rapid rehousing and rent subsidies. Many of them were brought on through the Heading Home campaign, which is a public-private partnership, and we're adding more in 2018. And then, as I mentioned, we've launched the One System. The new data system will be completely rolled out by 2018, and we're implementing coordinated entry for families. That has already started. Effective last week, we started opening up the first access points. So the family system now is working the way that the second map, that prettier picture that we showed before, that's how the family system is operating. We're moving on to the adult system next, and then the youth system, so that by the end of 2018, we should be operating as a truly coordinated system, which is, really seems like it should be easy, but it's really changing the way we have been doing business for the past 20 or 30 years. And it's going to take some time in partnership with our nonprofits, but we're making some very good progress. And the work is working. 13% reduction in youth homelessness since the last point-in-time count, 12% reduction in family homelessness, 30% reduction in chronic homelessness among vets. And it should not be lost on any of us that those are the 3 areas where we've seen substantial increase in investments between 2015 and 2017 is also where we started to see some nice reductions. Overall, San Francisco's numbers remained flat with a 1% really not very statistically significant decrease. But this is notable given that LA saw a 25% increase. I think Seattle, 15 or 16% increase, and Alameda County, 38% increase. And San Francisco's managed to keep our numbers relatively flat during this really large increase in homelessness we're seeing on the West Coast. Lastly, I should also point out, it did not speak much about how we're working on street homelessness. That is a big part of the strategic framework, although I want to point out the best way to address people camping on the streets is to find ways for them to exit homelessness. Simply putting people in shelters or navigation centers without exits from homelessness is not going to get the job done. But we do need to have more shelters in the city, and we also need to continue to work on improving our collaboration with other departments. And Commander Lazar will speak about that briefly at the end of my presentation. And just want to close with reminding everybody, this is a very compassionate city. We do amazing work, and we always try to lead with services when we're working with homeless folks. We need to continue that and remember that these are people that are on our streets. I think I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but I think it's just always important to remember that behind all these statistics is somebody's son, somebody's daughter, and they did not grow up wanting to be living outside in a city and having to go to the bathroom and live their lives in public view. And we always need to treat them with compassion and love, that same way we would treat any one of our neighbors, I would hope. But we also need to use common sense. We need to think about this problem at a systems level. We need to use data to make decisions. We need to make our investments based on what the data is telling us. And we need to change the way that we've done business, because we have invested a large amount of money in this problem, and we really need to focus on bending the curve by using best practices that other cities have used, mining the collective wisdom here in San Francisco, but also understanding that we can learn things from other places, and we've spent a lot of time doing that during the last year. Have seen cities like Houston, states like Connecticut and West Virginia, and the state of Virginia see pretty substantial decreases in homelessness by moving towards a more coordinated approach. And just to remind all of you that change takes courage. Trying to find this balance between compassion and common sense sometimes makes us a target for people those who don't believe in those two principles that I think most San Franciscans do. And we look forward to your continued support as we try to change the way we do business, use our investments more wisely, and then hopefully in the future make the case for additional investments where there's gaps in the system. And if I could, I just wanted to ask Commander Lazar just to finish off and just share a little bit about the work we're doing with the police department.
Great, thank you.
All right, good afternoon to the Chair, Supervisor Farrell, Supervisors Peskin and Tang and Fewer. I'm Commander David Lazar from the Community Engagement Division. One of my areas of responsibility is to represent the department on the homeless issue. And over the last 8 months since I've had this role, we've worked very closely with the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. We have a great partnership. We have a daily conference call almost every day, about 4 days a week. We have a daily face-to-face meeting. Police department's involved in the encampment resolution meeting that occurs on Wednesday. And we, as the primary public safety agency for law enforcement in the city, also have a role. Of course, we handle many calls for service coming in through 311 and also on our non-emergency line. But we also realize that the most important point of me speaking today is to say that the department has a role, but the primary role we encourage and leave with the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. We look at enforcement as our last option, and I think our officers are very successful when they have the relationships with the homeless outreach team, and when they see an individual in need, they're able to connect that person with the HOT team, connect them with services, whether it's the navigation centers or our shelters. And we will continue the collaboration. And the final point is that when we're all working well together and have a plan and have a good partnership, we're able to be successful and to deal with these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. And thank you, Mr. Kozinski. I just want to give you a chance to talk through this issue, and we've mentioned it before. I would render to guess every one of my colleagues and I get emails and phone calls on a daily basis about this topic. And having spent a lot of time working on these issues over the past few years, it's amazing to me when the statistics will tell you that our homeless population, let's just, for argument's sake, call it, has stayed flat, even though there's been a slight decrease. And other jurisdictions have seen massive increases. LA, you mentioned Seattle, certainly on the West Coast. But obviously it's becoming more and more of a visible issue as we develop south of Market and other places where people were before kind of out of sight, out of mind. As I express to folks, I am actually very encouraged by what you're doing and what our department's doing and working with all of our city departments, police included, and think we're moving in the right direction and we need to put more resources against it. I also hear the complaint that we spend too much money on it for not enough results. But as it relates to kind of how do you think about it as you talk about it with other folks, the notion of that San Francisco is actually staying flat in terms of overall numbers where other jurisdictions are really growing. To me, it speaks that the things that we're doing are working. Maybe not, we need to do more of it, I would argue. But I just want to give you a chance to voice your opinion on that, because I am sure as much as I hear it, you probably hear it more than I do.
Yeah, we do get quite a few emails from people concerned about the issue. There's sort of 2 points I'd like to make. One is that this is really a federal problem, and that people, I think, always appreciate understanding the fact that we as a country spend about 5 times more subsidizing home ownership than we do subsidizing low-income housing. We spend about $150 billion a year on mortgage interest tax deductions and capital gains exclusions, and about $30 billion on direct subsidies for low-income housing. And the HUD budget's been cut effectively by 80% since 1978, which is the beginning of the rise of modern-day homelessness. And we live in a state that doesn't spend a particularly large amount of money per capita on this issue, and there's other challenges at the state level we have to address. But San Francisco, nonetheless, has stepped up to this challenge, which has impacted a lot of cities by using things like Housing First and navigation centers to try to address the problem. And where we have made investments, we have seen progress. The initial 3,000 units that were brought on board as part of the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, did have an impact. It saw about a 2,000-person sustained reduction in homelessness. Then we flattened out. Where we've made investments during the past couple of years in family homelessness and in youth homelessness, as a city, we've made investments. We've seen nice, not big enough, but substantial reductions in homelessness there. But most notably, the dramatic decrease in veterans' homelessness around the U.S. Was clearly due to the Obama administration's investments in a variety of programs, the Veterans Administration Supportive Housing Program being a critical one. And in San Francisco, we have helped during the past 3 years house nearly 1,000 veterans and have reduced substantially the number of people who are chronically homeless on the street. So we know what works. Again, I think that we need to be, I think everybody agrees having 15 different databases and a really disconnected system isn't a best practice, and that fixing that is hopefully going to make a difference. But we know what works. We need to organize it a little bit better and then really figure out where the gaps in the systems are and fill those gaps so that we can see a substantial reduction in the problem in the city. It doesn't mean it's going to go away. I think we have a lot of work to do at the state and federal level and at the regional level as well. But nonetheless, we absolutely can and have to do better than we've been doing for the past 10 years or so, where we've seen about average 2.5% increase a year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kazitsky. Colleagues, any questions, comments? None. Okay.
I do want to acknowledge Mr. Kazitsky and his staff for what really is a monumental amount of work in bringing a whole bunch of siloized functions, whether they're computer functions or things that were at HSA and public health, under one roof. I know it's been a lot to do in a year. I think we are showing signs of progress, and I particularly want to thank Mr. Kazitsky for reaching out to individuals in my district who have actually been very interested in trying to help be a part of the solution. So thank you for taking those meetings and pursuing, really, I think, some very good creative ideas that are coming from the community.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Kazitsky.
Thank you. I just want to close by thanking San Franciscans. One of the great things about my job during the past year has been, yes, I get a lot of complaints, but what people don't ever really know about are the hundreds and hundreds of people who will email me or even call me, hey, I've got a homeless guy in my shower right now. I brought him in off the street to try to give him some assistance, or I'm at the hospital with this woman who's homeless who needs help. I have found everybody from the business community, from neighborhood groups, individual citizens, really across the board. People are really compassionate and want us to see us do better. Of course, people also don't want to have to worry about stepping on feces or needles in their streets and other behavior. But in general, I have just been really touched by the support that we've received from the community and from all of you, and just want to thank everybody who's here and all of our partners. I am very confident that things are going to get better during the next couple of years with this kind of compassion and energy that we've seen. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will open this up to public comment. I have a few speaker cards. Anybody is welcome to come up, and everyone will have 2 minutes. I have Gary McCoy, Kevin Carroll, Karen Flood, Cassandra Costello, and anybody else wish to comment on item number 5, please step forward. Mr. McCoy.
Good morning, good afternoon, supervisors. While I am a member of the statewide Homeless Financing and Coordinating Council, today I'm speaking on my behalf as a formerly homeless client of many of these services in the city and county of San Francisco. I commend the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing for their work on this plan. I know a lot of this I experienced firsthand. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the slide that showed the dozen or so different directions folks would have to go for intake in order to receive services, but I can tell you firsthand that was very accurate. I hope to bring a lot of these initiatives up for discussion at the state level, and so I appreciate the creativity, and it's nice to see that some of the things that we know have been working are being scaled up, and I look forward to seeing this plan in action. Thank you.
Hi, supervisors. My name is Mary Kate Bacalao, and I'm the Director of Public Funding at Larkin Street Youth Services. Larkin Street supports the HSH strategic framework wholeheartedly as a comprehensive and importantly realistic effort to reduce, prevent, and end homelessness in San Francisco. We applaud the focus on specific and measurable outcomes, and we acknowledge HSH as a tremendous partner in preventing and ending youth homelessness specifically, and providing a continuum of youth-specific housing and services through Larkin Street and our youth-serving partners. Importantly, we have reduced youth homelessness by 13% over the past couple of years, and that's been paired with a 15% increase in city-level investments. As Mr. Kaczynski indicated, though, federal and state investments are simply not enough to prevent and end homelessness effectively, and the HUD demonstration grant for youth is no exception. It's $2.9 million to be deployed over 2 years, and it needs to be prepared, matched with specific funding for youth at the city level, including crisis response and a youth-specific navigation center. So Larkin Street fully supports the plan, but would also recommend that the youth-specific strategy be built out more comprehensively in the plan, because we can't rely on HUD or the state to end homelessness for youth in San Francisco. And that's important not just for the youth who find themselves without a safe place to sleep at night, but also because youth who don't have an effective means to exit homelessness will age into being chronically homeless adults and homeless adult heads of families. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Kevin Carroll. I'm the Executive Director of the Hotel Council of San Francisco. Our industry fully supports the framework that's being presented, and we thank all of the supervisors in the city for the work that they've done to bring this issue as far as they have. And most specifically, we want to thank Jeff Kaczynski and his I think Supervisor Peskin mentioned how open and out in the community he has been. I think Mr. Kaczynski has been out to our organization and to multiple groups throughout the year to give us updates and hear from us, which I think has been very important as we communicate what's being done to our visitors and to our employees. When you think about this issue, It not only affects the homeless, of course, and from a compassionate point of view, but also our employees. 59% of our employees live in San Francisco and work in San Francisco, and then our visitors, of course. And I think when we look at the impact of all the changes that are already happening and what we hope will happen in the future, that will help all of our experiences and knowing that a compassionate approach is helping the homeless that are in our city right now. When a visitor comes here and puts on a hotel review out onto a travel site and says, we love your city, we love the restaurants, but we're not coming back because we feel like there needs to be more that can be done, that's something that we should all be concerned about, considering our number one industry is our tourism industry. And we know and we recognize that as well. Our Hotel Council, in partnership with SF Travel, started a long-term partnership with Project Homeless Connect. We did that for obvious reasons to help, but also to help educate our employees and our industry so that when a visitor asks us what's being done, we can tell them all the good work that's being done in this city to help people that are visiting. And we'll continue that partnership, and we'll continue our relationship in working with Mr. Kaczynski. We also want to thank Commander Lazar for his work and working with us as well, and all the important work that he's been doing. So again, we fully support this framework, and we thank you for your time and the focus on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Karen Flood. I'm the executive director of the Union Square Business Improvement District, and also here to support the 5-year strategic plan that's been put forth by the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Homelessness and bad street behavior is our number one issue in Union Square. There's no question I can't go anywhere on my job or even in my personal life and not hear about the issue. From day one, we've been trying to be part of the solution in Union Square through our ambassadors, doing regular outreach. We hired a HOTS team worker for about 18 months. We did a public education campaign. We now hire the Downtown Streets team, which are homeless individuals that are sweeping up our streets. But we know we can only do so much in our small but very important corner of the world. We need absolutely our partner with the city, and they've been tremendous partners, Department of Homelessness and the Police Department, Health Department, Public Works, in helping us, address this issue. But we really feel like we've just been managing it sort of day to day, and to really have a plan, a 5-year plan ahead of us that we can plug into is going to be absolutely key for us to feel like we're actually moving the needle and we're not addressing the same people and the same issues day in and day out. So, and communicating that plan out to people, out to our stakeholders, to our visitors, to everyone, to say, listen, this is what the city of San Francisco is doing. This is what the Business Improvement District is doing to really make a difference is going to be important. So we applaud the efforts in putting together this plan, and we absolutely support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Jean Field, and I'm representing Homebase, the Center for Common Concerns. Homebase is a national leader in legal and public policy-oriented technical assistance and has more than 30 years of experience helping many California communities, including San Francisco, and others around the country develop effective responses to homelessness and poverty. We applaud the strategic framework presented by the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, and we urge the entire San Francisco community, including this board, to work together to implement this framework. It will serve as an important roadmap to create an effective, coordinated system of care for our community's most vulnerable. San Francisco has long been an innovator and home to excellent, effective housing and services programs that are models for every other community around the country. But as Director Kaczynski pointed out, it is no longer sufficient to have just excellent programs. Communities must have effective, data-informed systems of care to address this persistent, large-scale crisis of homelessness we're facing. Our resources, our compassion, our common sense will never be enough to solve this problem if we are not coordinated and data-informed. And this framework outlines the important progress HSH has made in that direction. Importantly, I also want to point out that the department has made great effort to look at the system through the lens of people who are accessing the system, the people in our community who need these services the most, and to try to bring down barriers so those people can access it in a humane way. Your leadership and support is important to ensure the success of the framework, and we urge you to continue that leadership so that HSH has the resources and support necessary to ensure that this doesn't sit on the shelf, that it doesn't stall because of lack of resources, but that it is a working document to transform the system of care to serve those in need: veterans, youth, families, seniors, our neighbors, and all of those struggling to find housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Beth Stokes, and I'm the incoming Executive Director of Episcopal Community Services. I'm here to speak in support of HSH's strategic framework as a roadmap to achieve a significant and sustained reduction in homelessness in San Francisco. At ECS, we support a coordinated, integrated, and data-driven systems approach, one that includes the core tenets of a system model. Those core tenets being identified entry points, targeted assessment, and performance accountability, which is structurally built on the backbone of the One System data platform. We commend the director and his staff for their very hard work on this awaited framework. It is a paradigm shift. We also concur with the director that this initial iteration is imperfect, as stated. It's a working document, which we appreciate. ECS looks forward to continued opportunities to partner with the department on the implementation of this framework. As Director Kozycki articulates, success will only be possible by working in partnership with the community. We couldn't agree more and look forward to continued opportunities to work with the department as well as to leverage our collective experience to end homelessness in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Andrea Evans. I'm with the Tipping Point community. As you know, Tipping Point has made a significant investment toward reducing homelessness in San Francisco. I wanted to come here today to talk to you about the ways in which the Tipping Point investment and work is aligned with the work of HSH Strategic Framework. First and foremost, we are 100% in alignment on the goal of reducing chronic homelessness by 50% in 5 years. That is, in many respects, Tipping Point's North Star, and we are working towards that goal hand in hand with the department. I just wanted to provide a couple of examples of some of the ways we're already working with the department. We have funded a Tipping Point fellow who's actually an employee at the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. His job is to work on the data integration that you've heard a lot about today, and he is actively an integral member of the team that is working on rolling out this coordinated entry system. We agree wholeheartedly with the director that that is going to be a key way to move from providing resources in a somewhat ad hoc way to really targeting the limited resources that we have based on people's acuity and their real needs. And that is going to have a tremendous impact on the work that we're able to do going forward. We've also been engaged in the Moving On initiative that the director spoke about. And Tipping Point is piloting a program with a nonprofit here in San Francisco called Brilliant Corners that is working towards building up a housing ladder and moving people who are ready to move out of permanent supportive housing into other types of home market. It's very much at the beginning phases, but we're optimistic that it's going to be a model that we'll be able to sustain going forward. So I just want to thank you very much for your continued support and for really digging in on this issue that affects everyone in San Francisco.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Chair Farrell, Cassandra Costello with San Francisco Travel, and I'm here representing the voice of the visitor, of which there are 25 million annually that come to San Francisco, spending over $9 billion. This also equals 80,000 jobs and $750 million in local taxes. San Francisco Travel and our partners, such as the Hotel Council and others, our members and clients, are obviously very concerned about people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. It's heartbreaking to see people without fundamental human needs being met. We want to work on solutions with the city and the good work and leadership of the Office of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. We're incredibly thankful for the hard work of Jeff Kozycki and his team and the police department, such as Commander Lazar, who's here today. As devastating as this issue is, unfortunately, it also affects San Francisco on an economic level. Visitors are telling us every day that they're not going to return to San Francisco because of the issues that we see on our streets. Visitors feel unsafe and uncomfortable and say they'll choose other destinations for their business or leisure travel. Additionally, every one of our large conventions that come to San Francisco cite the homeless problems on our streets as one of the main issues that they have to grapple with when they're choosing which destination to come to next. In fact, some of our large conferences are contemplating not coming because of these issues.
And this matters not only because an issue of human dignity and compassion, but it also hurts us tremendously on a financial level. If one of these large conventions don't book in San Francisco, that's a loss of tens of thousands of visitors and millions of dollars in our local economy. We hope you'll support the efforts of HSH and their leadership and provide them with the tools for their success for this 5-year strategic framework. This is a complicated issue that needs compassion and comprehensive support for all of our aligned goals and helping people get off the streets. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Gail Gilman. I'm the CEO of Community Housing Partnership. I'm also the co-chair of the Supportive Housing Providers Network. We're here today to express that there are many aspects of the strategic framework that is in alignment with how we view our sector and combating homelessness. We believe that coordinated intake and assessment is key to ensure that the right individuals are receiving the right resource, whether that's reuniting with families and friends, and heading back to other destinations, whether that's rapid rehousing for a family that has the ability to become eventually economically secure, or whether it's supportive housing for a chronically homeless individual. We are really pleased to see that in the strategic framework. Community Housing Partnership was also delighted and enthusiastic to see the housing ladder, a concept that was first brought to the city's attention in 2014 in conversations with Mayor Lee and then the director of HOPE, Bevan Duffy. To see the housing ladder embraced by the city, to understand that housing mobility is possible for many, was a delight for us. We're happy to see it in the framework. Currently, over 400 supportive housing residents citywide have applied to the Moving On program, and they have closed their lists. We believe that 1,000 more of those individuals want housing mobility. They want to integrate back into districts outside of District 6, where the bulk of supportive housing is, and they want to live in single-family homes, grow their family, grow their households, and we're excited to see this in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Janet Crane on the board of North Beach Citizens, a homeless support organization that's been in business for about 20 years. Thank you very much for that very encouraging presentation. The hallmark of the way North Beach Citizens has always worked has been coordination. We handle everything for the homeless people who come to us in the Northeast waterfront area. So I would hope we can work together and support each other on this effort, and I'm very much encouraged that we can make a good team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors and the public. My name is Dale Seymour. I represent the local homeless coordinating board. I'm the co-chair. I have a few titles on my signature block on my email. My most proudest title, my signature block, is ex-homeless. I spent 18 years on your street experiencing the worst and the best of services in the city. I more or less joined the local homeless coordinating board because I wanted to, I can't stand outside and make a change. I needed to be inside so I could effect a change and bring some of my experience of those cold, windy, nasty nights on the streets to make it better. When the new department was formed with the director, Jeff, we really saw a change in how we handle things strategically. I want to let you know that we wholeheartedly support this new directive. We're not a rubber stamp board. We don't rubber stamp anything from anybody, from the mayor on down. We really look at it very strategically, intelligently, and I look at it from the nights I spent out there, whether this is something that's going to work well. Happy to see a lot of partners in this room, especially the Hotel Council. I think his name is Kevin, and also Ms. Flood. They're doing so much to make our city a better place. As they both said, to keep the lights on in this building, we need visitors. So we got to make our program as effective as we can to make this a better, friendlier, more comfortable place. And we're doing a lot, man. I mean, I'm really proud of what the department is doing and what it has done. I live in the East Bay. I no longer take a window seat on BART because it eats my heart out to see the encampments in Oakland. I'm glad I don't see those here, and I hope that you will continue to support this department and our citizens, our sisters and brothers out on the street, because homelessness is not a District 6 problem. It is not a Tenderloin problem. It is not a South of Market problem. Homelessness is a city of San Francisco problem, and it needs to be shared and supported by all members of this great city. Thank you much.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to comment on item number 5? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, unless any questions or comments, again, I want to thank Mr. Kozycki. I want to thank Commander Lazar for being out here. Thank you for your continued work on this topic and look forward to making a difference together. So with that, I guess Supervisor Peskin, could I have a motion to table item number 5?
File. So moved.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 6, please?
Yes, item number 6 is a hearing on the status of a master plan regarding utility undergrounding in San Francisco.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, this item was sponsored by Supervisor Fewer, who has joined us. And Supervisor Fewer, thank you for bringing this item up. I'm going to turn the mic over to you in just a second, but I just want to say really thank you for calling this item. I do appreciate it, and want to thank. This topic has been a hot topic in District 2 ever since I was elected. There are a number of constituents that I see here today. Mainly, I should say, as I'm eyeballing from Russian Hill. Cow Hollow certainly has that as well. I certainly want to thank the Brubaker family in particular, as well as I don't think Mr. Bancroft is here right now, but I want to thank all of our neighbors who are here today and have been working doggedly on this issue for a while. So thank you, Supervisor, for calling on this item. It's great to have another partner in crime, and I know Supervisor Tang, who's left us, has done some work on this as well over the past few years. So in any case, thank you very much, and I will turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Farrell. I know that you and also Supervisor Tang have taken great interest in this issue over the years. My own interest in utility undergrounding is motivated by concerns around neighborhood safety for districts like my own, as well as geographic equity. Between 1996 and 2006, approximately half of the city was undergrounded, particularly central San Francisco, but outer-lying neighborhoods like the Richmond, Sunset, Outer Merced, Ingleside, Excelsior, and Bayview were barely touched. That initial project went far over the estimated budget, with costs upwards of $173 million, leaving significant debt to be repaid through a ratepayer tariff. It's estimated that the current debt will take another 15 years to repay. Undergrounding utilities, for me, is less a beautification issue and more one of safety and ensuring that in the case of a disaster like the likes of which we have recently seen ravage our North Bay neighbors, not to mention Puerto Rico, Houston, and Mexico City, our neighborhoods are protected. Downed wires can be very dangerous for our residential communities, and I'm concerned that outer-lying San Francisco neighborhoods have been left behind in the efforts to underground utilities, even though they have and will continue to contribute financially to this initiative. I want to thank John Thomas, Deputy Director of Public Works, for being here today to present. Also thanks to Barbara Hale, Assistant General Manager of Power for the SF Public Utilities Commission, for being here in case there are any questions that arise. And though we did not invite PG&E to attend today, they are dealing with the fires and power issues in the North Bay and will be sitting down with my office in the future. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Director Thomas for a presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Farrell, members of the committee. John Thomas with Public Works, here to give you an update on the utility undergrounding efforts and kind of what it looks like going forward. To your point, Supervisor Fewer, this map shows what portions of the city have been undergrounded and then breaks down by district how many miles of overhead lines are still in place, total miles undergrounded, and what the percentage is within those districts. And I think, as you referenced, much of the downtown core has been taken care of, and you can see in several of the districts, District 3, 75.6%, District 5, almost 66%. But some of the outlying districts, District 10 and 11, around 18 or 19%, so far fewer. In part, that has to do with Rule 20A and the rules that surround the funding that has been available. So it's primarily commercial corridors and main streets within the city of San Francisco, or within the state, I think, as a whole, but certainly within San Francisco. So as you referenced, only about 41% of the city's roads have been undergrounded to date, leaving us with nearly 600 miles of streets remaining. Some of you have seen this before when I have talked about construction coordination, but it just serves to to kind of illustrate how challenging it can be and will be to perform this, and part of the reason why it is so expensive to underground the utilities in a city like San Francisco. For the most part, what you'll see on the right-hand edge of your screen there is the electrical conduit. We would install a duct bank in order to provide services to each of the fronting property owners on either side of the street, obviously in conjunction with and designed by PG&E here in San Francisco. So don't look too closely at this slide, but the total is kind of the key element to see on this one. $4.8 billion is what our current estimate is to underground. There are a couple of mathematical errors on the bottom. So what I would direct your attention to is the sections in the middle: planning and design, construction, and sort of a dig once. And what we've provided here is a rough estimate across each of the major utilities, showing almost $275 million in planning and design efforts necessary to move this forward, again, across the entire city. Nearly $3.5 billion in direct construction costs, and then associated work, property conversion, et cetera, adding another close to $1 billion. And we added in a line here for dig once that if a project like this was undertaken, I think it would be appropriate and prudent to pursue installation of the city conduit, which we've talked about and have intended to do throughout the city, but this would be one opportunity to fund that. But our estimate is at approximately $287 million to perform that work. So all told, about $4.9 billion. So certainly a significant cost. And I think much like the portions of the work that were done before, what we would like to undertake is a prioritization effort to figure out where this money could best be spent and in what way. The next slide talks about San Diego, and I think San Diego's been considered kind of a benchmark for undergrounding programs. They've had a program in place now for quite some time. They have a goal of undergrounding all residential overhead utility lines within the next 54 years. So a significant amount of time, certainly, to do that. They have many miles of roads, similar to San Francisco, but 15 miles per year is what they're anticipating undertaking. Now, to put that in context, our Public Utilities Commission is undertaking a similar number, 15 miles of sewer and 15 miles of water. So really a massive program even at that rate, and it would take us the better part of 40 years to get through all of the blocks in the city at that rate. Now, their cost is estimated today at about $54 million per year. They started many years ago and have ramped up to that level. The Rule 20A I mentioned earlier contributes about $10 million annually to their program, and a special CPUC resolution E3788 was passed for their work. I believe it adds about a 3.5% surcharge to their billing in order to fund this, and that generates, again, about $44 million per year.
Wait, can I just ask a quick question
Sure.
on that? So that was a local resolution?
Yes.
Done through the PUC to make it some type of utility tax, I mean, something akin to that.
Right, that's my understanding.
Okay.
So again, the funding and allocation, residential streets under that, and the major city streets, again, under 20A. So looking forward, we are looking at, number one, refining and underground information and developing a mapping interface. Number two, analyze and assess San Diego's utility underground program a bit further so we understand some more of the details of that to guide our development of a master plan. And then three, to develop staffing and budget to prepare a utility undergrounding master plan. Now, I am aware that we have about $125,000 in an add back, which we intended to use to help develop the staffing and budget plan and to look into San Diego's undergrounding program in more depth. So this was a brief presentation to give you a sense of where things are today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes, colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? I just have a few for Mr. Thomas. So there was $125,000 that was set aside towards the master plan, which you acknowledged. And so those funds, have we started work on the master plan using these funds at all?
We have not yet.
Okay. And would it be created by Public Works or by a consultant?
A combination?
The master plan.
Yeah, it would be a combination of
combination
consultant staff and Public Works staff.
Okay. And so have there been any investigation into new technologies like below ground scanning that is being used in the UK? And is that a possibility for San Francisco?
So we are in the process. We're continually looking at new technologies within the department. In fact, this week we are looking at some new scanning technologies as well as PG&E's keyhole investigation technology that they're using. So we are certainly looking at opportunities to make all of our work more cost effective. I don't, at this point in time, don't have anything directly that would
about the undergrounding
would save costs on this yet.
So you mentioned San Diego, and in San Diego, the work of the underground utilities has been contracted out to several private firms. And if we were to move forward with a plan to underground utilities, how do you envision that future efforts would be accomplished? By Public Works directly, by PG&E, and or by private contractors? And what are your thoughts about the city owning underground conduit and leasing space to power and telecom companies?
So to the first couple of questions, I mean, I would anticipate most of the work being done by private contractors with both Public Works and PG&E oversight. There's certainly, to do this volume of work, the department doesn't have the staff, and I don't believe PG&E could do this without outside support either. At this point, we've had very few projects with any undergrounding. I think 2nd Street, some of you are aware, is a project we are about to begin construction on, has just a couple of blocks of undergrounding that is part of the project budget. And even to get into PG&E's queue for design services has been a challenge. They have so much other work going on. So I envision most of this to be part of a consulting services packages. Your last question regarding conduit and the use of...
what are your thoughts about the city owning underground conduit and leasing space to power and telecom companies?
So my understanding is that's been part of the plan with the Dig Once program, which was passed by the board several years ago. And some of that funding has made its way into a couple of our contracts. I believe Columbus and Potrero took the lion's share of the $2 million allocated that year. And so to the extent that those are available, that is, I think, a program that the city and the board have adopted up to this point. There is, I believe, a lot of capacity within those conduits to put fiber in them, but I don't know what I'm not familiar with Department of Telecommunications' plan for utilization and connection of all of those conduit runs within the city.
So, Mr. Thomas, there is an option about 20B funding. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
20B funding, so that private homeowners could actually put money in to have their undergrounding happen for their residents. Is that correct?
I'm actually not aware of that funding.
That is correct, but getting PG&E to do it, even if you have neighbors who come up with the money or businesses that come up with the money, is close to impossible. But Rule 20B does allow for the proximate homeowners or building owners to pay, but good luck getting that through PG&E. I had one block in District 3, and most of District 3 is undergrounded, with the exception of the block that I live on and a handful of other blocks. But
yes, I saw that.
Getting them to do that is close to impossible.
And there's a recent development project on Ringgold between 8th and 9th, I believe, and it's a similar situation. In that case, though, where the developer decided to pay for all of the undergrounding on the Ringgold Alley. All it took was one homeowner who was unhappy with the plan to essentially stop the undergrounding on that. So it becomes quite challenging, even if you have the majority of people on those blocks who are interested in doing it. If one individual doesn't want to or can't, you end up having to maintain two systems.
Yeah, I think just a comment that the fact that people in my neighborhood will be paying for this for another 15 years out of in their bills, but little of it has come out to my neighborhood. I think this is the equity issue, quite frankly, that people in my neighborhood have had this surcharge and been paying it and will pay it for another 15 years. But in my neighborhood, where all our homes are really old, susceptible to fires, all those kind of things, very close together, I'm really concerned about if we were to have a natural disaster, what might happen to my neighborhood with the overhead wires. So I just have to speak for my neighborhood and my constituents that we feel a little bit that this has been part of the cities has been benefited from this, even though we're paying into it, but we haven't really greatly benefited from this at all. So I just wanted to make that one comment and open it up to questions from my colleagues or to public comment at this time.
I wanted to make one quick point that there is a line item on here for property conversion. This was something also looking back on the program that was undertaken in the early 2000s to the point I made also a moment ago about property owners either being unable or unwilling to fund the conversion that they needed to make, et cetera. So this, and again, would be the board's decision on this, but is providing about $600 million to actually pay for those property conversions. And that's just simply a proposal here, but to avoid the additional administrative costs and time that came about trying to implement some of the last generation of undergrounding projects.
So, Chair Farrell, should we open this up to public comment now?
Absolutely. Let's open this up to public comment. So we have some speaker cards, but anyone, please come on, line on up, and everyone will have 2 minutes. And Brubaker, Randall Brubaker, Mark Snyder, Richard Cardello, Carol Ann Rogers, and Sarah Tabor. Please come up. Everyone will have 2 minutes. And thank you, everyone, for your hard work on this issue.
My name is Ann Brubaker. I'm the San Francisco chairman of the Coalition to Underground Utilities, and I want to thank Sandra Feuer for her efforts of bringing this into more of the public realm, and Mr. Farrell particularly for being one of our original supporters. As you know, this is a citywide issue. We are represented, our coalition is represented by almost every district in San Francisco. And I think, as Supervisor Feuer has pointed out, these are issues that need to be addressed now and not wait until our city catches fire. Oh, is the overhead not working? Oh, so it's not. There it is. There we go. Richard is going to just share some of these with you and the rest of the city as they look at these. I did have some questions for Mr. Thomas. The $125,000. It's not clear to me particularly how that is going to spread over writing of a complete master plan, and if there is a plan within the DPW to get a full master plan written as was done in San Diego. That is the very first step. And we need to know how much DPW thinks that in itself would cost. I also want to ask Mr. Thomas if he is aware that during the last round of undergrounding, a plan was written by PG&E and the city, and a former PG&E engineer who has met with us indicated that someplace on file at the DPW, there is some kind of a current master plan, which is something that I believe the DPW ought to have at hand and be able to access to reduce the cost of writing the master plan. Guess my time's up. I think some others have things to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Mark Snyder. I'm on the steering committee of the San Francisco Coalition to Underground Utilities. Thank you, supervisors, for having this hearing and for moving this process along. It's been stalled for 10 years. It's time to get things moving again. There are various sources of potential funding that need to be sorted out. It's clear that unless the old master plan can be revived and utilized towards future undergrounding, that additional funding will need to be obtained to create a full master plan, and we look forward to working with Mr. Thomas and Department of Public Works to help move along in that direction. Thank you for having this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for being here.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Carol Ann Rogers. I'm here speaking both personally for myself and on behalf of Russian Hill Neighbors, a neighborhood organization in several districts on Russian Hill. And we have been an early and enthusiastic supporter of the whole concept of completing, finally, the undergrounding of utilities in San Francisco. There are a number of issues that have already been mentioned. I just want to highlight them again. There's clearly an equity issue. I happen to be fortunate enough to be on a block where undergrounding took place back in the early 70s, but there are many residents of the city who do not have that benefit. Clearly, what's happened in the past week shows it is a safety issue, and that is something that we really need to be concerned about, given all the disasters that we have been learning about in recent months. I feel it's also an economic issue, and of course, it's a quality of life issue. San Francisco is a world-class city. Other cities, other countries have accomplished this. There is no reason with our technology and everything we have available to us that we cannot do this. 54 years seems like a very long time. When I first arrived in San Francisco, our block, we still live in the same place, our block had just been undergrounded or was undergrounded shortly thereafter. That was in 1971. So even with 54 years, if we had completed that project when that began, we would be almost done by now. It's not going to get any less expensive. It's not going to get any less complicated. So we have to take the first step. A master plan is that, and then move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Randall Brubaker. I'm part of the San Francisco Coalition of Underground Utilities. First, I want to thank the Board of Supervisors and John Thomas and the DPW that this subject is in front of us, and we hope it stays in front of us. That's what we need. Now, I do want to put some pictures up here. Did I do the right thing?
Overhead,
okay.
please.
SFG TV, there you go. And Randy, if you'd speak into the mic, it'll pick you up.
I went out about a month ago and took a couple of pictures from not far from where we live, and the point here is just to show what it looks like, what it can look like, what it does look like in certain parts of the cities, both before, over here, and after. And there are a couple of messages in this. One is that it is only done in part of the city, which, as you've been hearing from other people today, is not fair, and it also doesn't make sense with regard to the fact that it can be done, it has been done in part of the city, and so many other places in the world are doing this. So what we're hoping to see is a continuation of the conversation, and we will absolutely need the professional attention of our professionals in the city, and probably going to need more of them to take on this whole project as it has been done and can be done. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
I'll try not to be repetitive. The supervisors, thank you for hearing all of us today. I'm Sarah Tabor. I'm the Secretary for the Design, Zoning, and Land Use Committee for Russian Hill Neighbors. And obviously, as Carol Ann has said, it is an issue that undergrounding is an issue that has concerned us for some time. I wanted to talk about, we have the streets dug up all the time. At one point, we were talking about only digging up the streets once and doing all the work at one time. I don't see why the departments cannot coordinate and put together a plan so that when 3 blocks are being torn up, that those 3 blocks could not be undergrounded at that time, which would save a huge amount of money. There is a lot of money involved. We're talking about spreading it over a lot of time. That I think it could be ameliorated a lot if the departments coordinated and made sure that any digging got used for several projects at once. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next speaker, please.
Janet Crane, residents of Russian Hill. 3 points. 1, living on my block is like being in Dili. Look out of the window and there's wires that would be proud to find in a third world country. Surely we can do better than this. Second is coordination with cell phone installations. What is the theory here where the cell phone companies can use the power poles for cell phone equipment, making things doubly intrusive in the streets? And the third thing is safety. And back when the Embarcadero Freeway was up, it took an earthquake to get rid of it. Maybe the Napa fires are the stimulus here to just really rethink the issue of undergrounding. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I have the overhead, please. Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Richard Cardello. I'm a board member of Russian Hill Neighbors, and I sit on the Design, Zoning, and Land Use Committee, and I am also a supporter of the San Francisco Coalition to Underground Utilities. My compatriots here have spoken to you with intellectual arguments, but I have a little more message to your hearts. I mean, I've lived in San Francisco since 1982, and I love my adopted city, and I'm very proud of San Francisco, as I'm sure you are. I'm fortunate to live at the corner of Green and Jones Streets, where the utilities have already been underground. However, when I travel throughout our city, I'm shocked at how many of our beautiful public vistas are marred by the visual blight of so many overhead wires and equipment. And here is an example. I mean, that is a $1 zillion view in this city of Alcatraz, and it's astounding. I mean, that's not a doctored up photograph. That's what you see when you walk down Leavenworth Street. I know this afternoon's hearing is specifically regarding the undergrounding master plan and DPW's report, and I know that this issue is complex. My testimony today is to stress the significance of undergrounding to those who think of San Francisco as a world-class city. The desire to complete this long anticipated project is growing in all of our districts. Please advance and support the cause to underground the utility wires in San Francisco. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Richard. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 6? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and thank you, Supervisor Fewer, for scheduling this hearing, and to the Coalition for continuing to keep our feet to the fire. This has been a remarkably frustrating issue that actually, if my recollection serves me, and Ms. Hale, who we have not heard from, may recall this better than I, was slowed down remarkably after Pacific Gas and Electric filed for bankruptcy. Prior to that, we actually were doing not as much as San Diego, but we were not far behind that. I think we were doing 12 miles a year, if my recollection serves me. After PG&E filed Chapter 11 in 2000, and what was that year, Barbara? Two or three, they basically stopped doing it. And I mean, I've been down the 20A road for years. I've been down the 20B road. The folks from Russian Hill Neighbors will remember our valiant efforts where everybody on that block was willing to pay, and PG&E said no. And I'm sitting here looking at an article in the Chronicle about how PG&E just filed at the SEC about the fact that their $800 million insurance policy is not going to cover 20% of their liability in Napa and Sonoma counties. Their stock has plummeted 23%. And without their involvement in this matter, it's just not, I don't know how we're going to ever, we'll do another plan. I think we did a plan 15 years ago, Barbara, you might recall, because Supervisor Dufty and I were all over this, and it's just been remarkably frustrating. I'm glad to know that DPW's at it. I would love to hear from the PUC, and I salute Supervisor Fewer, but I have to say it has been one of the more frustrating things, and I've said this to Ms. Brubaker on 100 occasions. I just always throw my hands up and go like, I mean, without PG&E participating in this in a meaningful way, I don't know how we're ever going to do anything beyond our mission bays and, you know, Pier 70s where we get to start over from scratch. And I, as the District 3 representative, am kind of the best off of anybody in town at about 75% undergrounded. And there's, I mean, it's, you know, remarkable district. It's ground zero for tourism. And there's still places like where I live on the Filbert Street steps that are still not undergrounded. And I would love to make progress in this arena. I just don't see how to do it without PG&E stepping up to the plate.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin, and for your long efforts on this as well. You know, to add a bit of a bright note on a generally related topic, Governor Brown today vetoed SB 649, which this board unanimously supported a resolution encouraging that to happen. So we're very excited about that, and that would have been, as we all know, a big corporate giveaway to the telecom industry to take over and take away any jurisdiction of the PUC, in particular, of our infrastructure here in San Francisco. So we're very excited about that. So a light of hope in light of today's discussion. With that, Supervisor Fewer.
Yes. So thank you, supervisors. You know, I'm a newbie to this, so thank you for sharing your frustrations and your previous work to try to get this done. Mr. Thomas, so I have just a few more questions for you, if you don't mind. So we're talking today about this master plan that I think that we've heard from a speaker that there's a master plan that might have existed, that still existed. Can we work off that master plan? Also, we have the $125,000 have been set aside for the master plan. So is there an existing master plan already that we can work off of? And then what is the timeline for the master plan that you spoke of in your presentation?
And just by way of background, we did have an undergrounding task force, and I don't know what happened and what the product of their work was. I actually just got a text from former Supervisor Dufty's staff at that time, who said that the utility undergrounding task force worked on this for a year and that, quote, PG&E stonewalled the whole time.
So Lynn Fong from Bureau of Streets and Mapping has some information on that piece.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Fong from the Bureau of Street Use and Mapping. I was a prior program manager at the time, and we did have an undergrounding task force, and as a result of that, in 2007, they developed a report. There was no actual master plan. It was just a guide of how to start creating one back in 2007. That's what I do recall, and what we can do is now that that report is circulating again, we're going to re-review it and start taking up what their guidelines are to create that master plan.
Great. So do we have a timeline for that?
Well, when we were working with John Thomas and our other team members, we were thinking in the next 6 months we'll come up with something to provide to the Board of Supervisors and what our next goal would be just with that 125,000.
Okay, and how much do you think a master plan would cost, a full master plan?
The actual master plan, you know, we were trying to develop ballpark figures, but at this point, we just really need to start looking at what we want to do, you know, based on developing a GIS map and the other points that John had pointed out. We just really want to take a look at that first before we throw out some ballpark numbers.
So you think in 6 months you might have something to bring before this board?
We have a better idea of what we can do, definitely.
Okay. So Chair Farrell, in light of this, I'm making a request that we would continue this item to the call of the chair.
Absolutely. We can.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other comments?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out today, and especially thank you, Mr. Thomas, for coming today to present, and thank you to all the public speakers, and for keeping your eye on the goal here and pushing us.
Thank you, Supervisor Fuhr. With that, I entertain a motion to continue this item to the call of the chair. Moved by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us today?
There's no further business.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.